Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my home. And if you've joined me before, you know that I'm not usually standing up, but because it's the holidays, I put on earrings and I wanted to get into it. I want to welcome you to the November Essential Vegan Desserts live event. I'm very happy that you're here spending the next hour or so with me. And we're going to be talking about mise en place. Mise en place, if you're in the course, you're a culinary professional or you've studied any kind of culinary, you know that's really a critical point, a very important point. But I've been kind of expanding the idea and thinking about mise en place in my life. And it's just a wonderful concept that's been helping me. So I want to share that with you. And in the context, of course, the holidays are coming up, both Thanksgiving and then the Christmas Hanukkah holidays. And for most of us, they're going to be considerably smaller. Mine is going to be me alone, having dinner alone. Well, I don't alone, yeah, solo, let's say, and with my family on Zoom. So I want to talk about that as well. I would love to make this very interactive as usual. So don't hesitate to put some questions in the queue right on the right side of the screen, and I will get to as many questions as I can. And I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell today, walk around my kitchen a little bit and show you some of the things I do to help me get set up, whether it is for a holiday season or just in general. I want to take a moment to welcome our newest students who have enrolled in the November course to Essential Vegan Desserts. Any current students who are here, hello. And I hope there are some graduates as well. And guests, if you are here and you're not in the Essential Vegan Desserts course, or you're in another Ruby course, or you're just here because you wanted to see what goes on, welcome to everyone. I want to commend my students. I am so inspired by your work. You know, I do some grading almost every day, and the work is magnificent. So thank you for that. Thank you for putting the effort in. I learn from you. I think we all learn from each other. I have been doing pastry now for desserts now for like 30 years or so, but there's always something new to learn. And I'm learning also. Don't think you get to a certain point and that's it. Stay curious. For some of the students who have had some less than successful results with some of the recipes and activities, that's where the learning happens. Things happen for me as well. You want to pay attention. And the very first thing is to gather your mise en place. In addition to ingredients, getting your ingredients together, prepping your ingredients, making sure they're at temperature, making sure your oven is at temperature. You want to get yourself calm, read the recipe all the way through, more than once perhaps. And if you have any questions about the recipe, if something doesn't make sense to you, that's the time to figure it out. If you don't have an important ingredient, you can't make the recipe necessarily. If the recipe calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, for example, and you don't have cinnamon, you can go with it. And today, because there is some scarcity of particular ingredients, I'm quite aware of it, we're going to talk about things you can do to swap out. Now, I want to say to you that when I get started, whether I just have an idea that I want to get in the kitchen and make something, or it's going to be a day or several hours of the day where I'm going to be testing recipe, I start the same way all the time. And that is, I make sure my counters are clear. except for what I need, that my utensils are laid out. Before I do that, I clean. I clean off my counters. I sweep the floor and I wash the floor. That for me is part of mise en place, my life. It gives me a certain calm. When I'm working with cooking, with baking, for me, that's like meditation. It is not a chore. Now, I'm not going to say to you that if something goes wrong and I'm on a deadline, I'm happy about it, not necessarily, but I take a step back. And again, the very first thing that I do is get settled. So my kitchen gets cleaned up. I lay out the things I want to use. And I always, if I'm going to be baking, I position a rack in the oven in the position it should be. If I'm doing pies, then I'm using the lower third of the oven. If I'm doing cupcakes, I'm using the upper third of the oven. And if I'm baking cakes and cookies, it's in the center of the oven. And we go through the reason why in the course. We're quite detailed about it. This is a fully vegan pastry course. However, you have to have foundational technique, an understanding of foundational technique in order to make successful desserts, whether you're doing traditional ones with butter and eggs and white sugar or vegan ones. Technique really matters. My oven bings or tings or whatever, makes a noise when to tell me that my oven is at temperature, but I have learned that it's not at temperature when I hear that noise. So I preheat my oven quite far ahead. Now I want to show you something. I have two of these in my oven. These are thermometers, super important. When I moved to this kitchen 3.5 years ago, I was really happy to see that I had a convection oven. It was brand new. I didn't choose it, but it was brand new. And I thought this is going to be great, except my experience of working with ovens for so many years, whether in commercial kitchens or home kitchens, has taught me that you put the dial, for example, at 350, and more than likely you're not getting 350, even in the fanciest ovens. So I have two of these, as I said, in my oven, one on the center rack, one on the top rack. And my oven was running about 25 to 30 degrees low. That's what I got used to. So to get to if I wanted 350 Fahrenheit, I would push my oven to 365. That seemed to be the magic number. Well, to my surprise, I don't know if the oven got more mature or more used to me, but it is now a little bit running a little high. So pay attention. And if you can get someone to calibrate your oven, you might not be able to do that now. Don't worry about it. Just work with the dial. Use the thermometers and work with the dial. So that's a really important thing to do. I have always, this is my big Robocoup full of chopped chocolate because I am getting ready to make desserts for some, I can only eat so much since I'm going to be having the holiday meals alone and I can't put the food through the Zoom camera, but neighbors are really happy to have treats and I like to keep things in my freezer. So when I'm doing a large quantity of chocolate, I break it into pieces. I have a chocolate fork, or you can use a heavy serrated knife. And I grind it like this. And you can do this in your food processor as well. I also have, I want to show you, tape and a Sharpie, because you have to know what it is that you put away. So my chocolate, that chocolate that was chopped is going to say 72% or 70% and the particular brand and a date. Dates are really important and labeling is really important. I'm going to tell you something. It's kind of embarrassing, but this is what happens. I was really hungry yesterday. I had done a day-long online event, and I always have food in my freezer. So I saw it was, we have a lot of, it was brown. It was kind of beige. I thought it was hummus. I defrosted it, tasted it, and I'm like, that doesn't taste like hummus. It's very creamy. It was cream of celeriac soup, which I really love, but it sure would have helped to know that what it was. And the same thing in my freezer, I have small containers of aquafaba, reduced aquafaba, ready to go. I forgot that I also have flax gel. When they're frozen, they look the same. So you want to label everything. Give yourself, this might seem not important, and it isn't perhaps as much fun as the doing, but this is going to really make your work more joyful, peaceful, and successful, ultimately successful. Now here, I have a jar with, you can see there are cashews, raw cashews, soaking. I did this yesterday. I buy whole cashews, not pieces. I think it's a better quality. I think the cream or whatever it is that we're doing with the cashews is better. So I can keep this for 2 days in my refrigerator. After that, I've learned this. I drain the water and I put them in a bag. Now, I don't like using plastic, but sometimes I have to. I have a very small top freezer. I didn't get my dream kitchen, and it doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon with the lockdown. So I make a flat package. This is labeled 5 ounces soaked, 11, 12. But I know that 5 ounces of soaked cashews is going to weigh 7.5 ounces. So if I want to divide it in half, I'm going to divide that in half. You really want to have a scale. And I have said this in the course. I have a scale like this. I have 2 like this, a digital scale. I also have a small one for weighing small, like a jeweler's scale for half a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon. There are a lot of charts that you can find. We have a number of them in the course that are going to do conversions for you. But the best thing you can do is to keep your own notebook, because the kinds of flour weigh differently, the kinds of cocoa weighs differently, and so on. So make your own notebook. I have a couple of students graduates I'm still in touch with. I love when you stay in touch with me after the course, and that's what they do. I want to see what else. Oh, so this is an experiment, and I'll let you know how it works. But I decided to see what would happen if I made what I have dubbed a super egg. Many of you know that 1 tablespoon of flax or chia plus 3 tablespoons of generally water is the equivalent of 1 egg. For some recipes, there is no one size fits all at all. But I decided, because I had some aquafaba out, to mix the flax with aquafaba. I don't know if it's going to make a difference. If it makes a tremendous difference, then it's worth it. Otherwise, if you don't have aquafaba around, don't bother. But I will let you know about that. I'm holding this from the bottom because those of you who have a cake stand like this know that the bottom will fall off. I love these turntables. So I keep my everyday ingredients on a turntable like that. And I have my aluminum-free baking powder. And even the baking powder has a date, November 2020. Doesn't last forever. If you're a bakery, buy a larger quantity. If you're going to be doing things at home, a smaller quantity. If you aren't sure if your baking powder is still active, mix it with some boiling water and it should fizz. I decant my baking soda into a jar like this, and it's labeled with the date. I'm using Bob's Red Mill baking soda. And I'm using aluminum-free baking powder for two reasons. One is the health reason. I don't want any aluminum. I want to minimize the aluminum that goes into my body. But when you're making a recipe with a fair amount of baking powder, I mean, there's not tons of baking powder, but for example, the drop biscuits, you're going to taste it's going to taste tinny. So that's what I do. I have a couple of my favorite vanillas. Vanilla costs a lot of money lately. It's a really important ingredient in rounding out flavors. But I tell you, unless I'm doing a vanilla cake, I cut back a little bit. So this is one that I like. And this is a double fold that I use, for example, in the vanilla cream, because I don't want to add lots of vanilla extract. I don't want to thin it. I don't want to you get too much of the alcohol, but this is really terrific. And I'm just spinning this to see what else. And then I've got my bottle of chocolate extract. Now those are only the ingredients that I use all the time. I keep, for example, peppermint extract in a cabinet. I don't want to grab it by mistake. Nobody should be grabbing anything by mistake. You want to make sure and look, no matter how many times you've done something. I'll tell you, many years ago, my son's favorite birthday dessert was baked Alaska. And this was well before I was vegan. And one year I made it and it looked gorgeous. The meringue was a little strange and he took a bite and spit it out. I used salt instead of sugar. So that would never happen today because number one, I'm more careful and I'm using organic cane sugar, which is not pure white, but still you want to know. I have tons of, this says cream, but but it's got sugar in it because for yesterday's event, I had made sure I had 25 minutes to do a recipe. It was actually a 3-part recipe and I got it done in no time. But I wanted the sugar, for example, measured out. So there you go, labels. I use masking tape, and from my days in the restaurant, I think this is called painter's tape, but there it is. And let's talk about dates because we like to, dates are a nice alternative for sweeteners. The reason that I do this all ahead, the reason we really hone in on mise en place is it's a system that's going to change your life. There was a very lively conversation in the Essential Vegan Desserts Facebook group. We have a private group for our students, and one of the newer students in the course wrote and said, do you really, to her colleagues, she posed the question, do you really do mise en place? Because it seems to take so many little bowls and things. And I was very gratified that there was a very long thread. Yes, we do, because when I don't, for me, it's a setup to what I'm doing. So again, it's pleasurable, but I don't want to stop and soak dates. I do have an electric kettle in my kitchen, or I always have a pot of boiling water on. So if I need to hot soak some cashews because I have to do something quickly, I'll do that. The same thing with the dates, but how much easier to just have them like this. So these are just whole dates that have water over them and they're softened and ready to go. And I also have date paste in the freezer because you can just scoop out what you need and put the rest away. It doesn't get super, super hard. This is also baking soda, but this was baking soda that I had in the back of my refrigerator for months, and I think it's probably done its job. I don't like waste, and so I'm going to use this to clean a drain or something like that. I'm not going to use this for dessert. This, I like having, I do have cans of particular ingredients in my pantry at all times. I have canned coconut milk, full fat. If I want a lower fat coconut milk, I mix it with water. I'm not paying for water. I use very little coconut oil personally, but when I do use it, I use the refined when I don't want any flavor. And I like coconut butter a lot. I've made that from coconut shreds in my food processor in the same way that you would make any nut butter, actually. It takes a little longer, but you can definitely do it. I happen to be talking to Allison Cox, who is the co-owner of Edwards and Son, which has Let's Do Organic and Native Farms, really stand-up people. And she told me that this creamed coconut, which you can find almost everywhere, I've seen this in all kinds of stores, and it doesn't take much room, is a really good substitute for coconut butter. So I keep this around for sure. Here's an example of why we label. This is vanilla. It smells like vanilla, but I don't know what it is because the cap says pea pie. So that's Fran shortcut for pumpkin pie spice is what I'm thinking. I suspect, I'm telling you the truth here. I suspect this is gluten-free vanilla extract, but if I'm not 100% sure, I am definitely not going to use it for a recipe. Now, I don't know if you can see this behind me. That's usually a pile of kitchen cloths that are inside of the cabinet, not on the outside, but I wanted to remember to tell you that you can really give yourselves a great start by having a lot of kitchen cloths and a lot of bowls and a couple of whisks. You don't have to buy tons, but I use kitchen cloths not only to dry up my dishes, I like to clean up as I go along, but I also have some that are just for produce. I will wash and dry my produce and then wrap it in a cloth and put it in the fridge, and it keeps things nice and fresh, really, for much better. I'm trying not to use plastic wrap. I'm using things like this now. I have these silicone lids and some of these bee cloths that you squitch and go on top of the packages because things definitely have to be covered. Now, those of you in the course may have made these wonderful drop biscuits. I made them yesterday for this event, even though I only had 25 minutes. It's a one bowl mix, the drop biscuits. And then I made pumpkin butter, which just is the spiced pumpkin that's in the course, taken a little further. And that's what's on this biscuit. And when this call is over, I'm sure that's what's in my mouth. And this one, the lighter color, is a pumpkin mousse that was made by combining equal parts of the vanilla cream that's in the course. And actually, that recipe is on my website. If you're interested in the recipe, you can get it at francostigan.com. And the pumpkin. I decided that as I was mixing it, the color was really beautiful and I knew the flavors would be good. I added a little extra pumpkin. So you can do that to taste. So what I did with the vanilla cream that was different was I didn't use any gorgum and I didn't use any agar, but it really worked a charm. And then I always have vanilla cream in my freezer. It tastes like ice cream when it's frozen, but it defrosts really, really beautifully. And this could be a nice dessert for Thanksgiving. I'm not going to make a big cake for myself. I'm not going to make a big pie for myself. I might make myself a little tart, but a little bit of the mousse on some cream with some candied cranberries. And I think I'm really good to go. I want to suggest that, You don't have to buy everything all at once. This is a good time of the year to buy things, though, if you have some kind of budget, because there are a lot of sales. But I like having these little pinch cups, I call them, in all kinds of, I have some metal ones. Because when I do my mise en place, I find that if I do it visually very nicely, it just becomes more of a pleasure for me. And I want this all to be joyful. Patrick, our wonderful producer, has put the event document in wherever it is. I see it's there that you can download it. What it is it's a draft of an inventory that I was starting to do. We do a pantry reset in the course. That's really important. You want to look for expired ingredients. We all have them. You want to use labels. You want to clean it up. It becomes a pleasure. And then it's ongoing. I find I have to do something, do an inventory about once a month. And oftentimes I'm moving things around because I say, gee, I'm working over here differently from the way I'm working over here. And so that's something that I suggest that you do. I have my fine sea salt in a couple of places in the kitchen so that I can grab it. I have it near the stove, and I have it, my baking center is around the corner over there where I have my Roboku usually lives, my regular food processor, my Vitamix, and recently I bought a NutriBullet. Another instructor in the course, my very good friend Char Nolan, suggested to me that I get a NutriBullet for times I didn't want to use my big Vitamix, and it works okay. You can't get anything hot. There are some differences, but I'm finding that I am definitely using it. So I'm going to take a couple of questions now. Terry B says, you're a wealth of knowledge and you look forward to these sessions. Thank you so much, Terry. That's really nice of you to say. I appreciate that. Okay, Gwendolyn wants to know about flowers. What staples do I always have at hand? That is a very interesting question today. I have whole wheat pastry flour, but let me say that I am quite aware that finding whole wheat pastry flour today is a real problem. I got some from Bob's Red Mill, but they said they don't expect to have it anytime soon. King Arthur seems to be out. A few students on the West Coast told me they found it at Whole Foods, but it seems not to be there. But if someone will remind me, I'm going to tell you of a workaround that I've got for whole wheat pastry flour. I always have all-purpose flour, AP flour, spelt flour, whole, and what they call white, although that seems to be in short supply too. I have some rye flour as well. I have Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 gluten-free all-purpose baking flour. I keep my flours in the refrigerator or freezer. And again, I don't have a big freezer space. I have an ordinary refrigerator. But I think I was really smart. Just when the lockdown started, I bought myself a smaller fridge with a tiny little freezer, and it got into the back hall of my home, and that's a help. And now, because I'm in Philadelphia, winter is coming, and my terrace will be kind of my root cellar, so I can keep things like my flowers and nuts and seeds, if there's any overflow, outside. So those are the basic flours that I use. AP, whole wheat pastry, whole wheat, bread flour. I've been making more bread, and I do have some rye. I have buckwheat. I have rice flour, brown rice, white rice, and superfine. I have oat flour, but I make my own oat flour most of the time by grinding oats very finely in my Vitamix dry bowl. I do that. I'm trying to think what else. I have coconut flour. I have some banana flour that I haven't used yet. That's what I do. Now, Tamiko wants to know, have I used vanilla paste? I just bought some recently. I'm not crazy about the one that I have. I think it has a bit of an off taste. I think it's the suspension that it's in, but it works really nicely. There is some sugar in vanilla paste. It works nicely. You get a little bit of the seed. So you use it similarly to a vanilla bean. I would go in between a vanilla bean and vanilla extract, add a little bit, taste, add a little bit more. Of course, if you're using it in a battery, you're not going to be able to tell. So I use it pretty much 1-to-1 for vanilla extract. Monica wants to know, what's the best way to make pastries oil-free? Can you sub out oil for applesauce at an equal ratio? Monica, that's a really big question and one that I get often. Anytime you take an ingredient that is integral to making a good pastry, you swap it out, there's going to be a difference. And it might be okay with you, and it might not be. So the very first thing you're going to do is cut the recipe in half, maybe even in a quarter, and try it. Now we have a whole unit in the course on substituting, and applesauce is one sub. I've got prune puree, which is always in my freezer. You may see that today more likely as plum, but it's prune and that works really nicely. Some people use bananas. Some recipes don't need any. So we have a couple of oil-free. Now, for example, take for example, my chocolate cake to live for. That was my breakthrough cake. That's still my most popular cake. I have the standard version with wheat flour and some liquid oil. When you're subbing liquid oil for butter, if you're doing conversions, you use 3/4 of the amount of oil. So this is a very good place for me to show you. This is my favorite little measuring cup. Now, if I was working in a particular restaurant where I worked, I'm sure that my boss would have said, "What's with the toy, Costigan?" But this is a 4-tablespoon, 2-ounce cup. For a layer cake, that cake, which will feed 12 people, there's 2 ounces of oil in there, which is very little per person. But if you want to take it all out, it is possible. And I have done that without subbing anything. Some of you know, because I do tell this, I made Rip Esselstyn's wedding cake. So Rip is the Engine 2 diet. His dad, Dr. Esselstyn, very renowned how to prevent and reverse heart disease. Rip was getting married. He called me up. He said, "We want your chocolate cake, one for every table and one for Jill and I to cut." I was thrilled. I wasn't going to make a cake with oil for the Esselstyns. I simply left it out just to see. I did that, dividing it to see what would happen. To my taste, it was fudgier. It didn't have the crumb. That's my favorite, tender crumb for a cake, but it was fine. Recently, now when I get a recipe that's down pat, and that recipe has been with me the longest, it's really time to stop tinkering. But recently I made a half of it just to see, and I put some applesauce in. It was either applesauce or prune puree. To tell you the truth, I don't remember. And I think I liked it better, but I want to see. So those are the things you can do. And people do that all the time. Linda wants to know any general tips on serving food with a small gathering to be COVID smart. Linda, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I have friends who will be hosting very small groups, like 4 people max. This is not something I have to be concerned about. And there was a conversation yesterday about it. And what they decided to do, and I believe this is following COVID guidelines, is there isn't going to be any shared food. There isn't going to be any shared platter. Every individual is getting their own plate, and people are actually bringing their own utensils. into the house. Some people are serving on paper plates. So that's what I would suggest you do. And if anyone knows anything else, just put it in the chat. Tomiko says, hi, it's nice to see you. I've made some coconut butter and haven't used it yet and not sure what to use it for. You know, there are people who told me years ago, oh, it's so delicious. You're going to want to eat it off a spoon the way you eat peanut butter or almond butter or tahini in my case, because I love tahini. I don't really want to eat it off a spoon. It's a whole food version of coconut oil, so you can use it for that. In the course, we have the very popular raw dessert that is Chad Sarno's, and the crust, you can use either coconut butter or coconut oil, and that's how I use it. I kind of use them interchangeably. Of course, coconut oil has all the fiber in it, so it doesn't melt in the same way, but I think it's really delicious. And Tomiko has another question. How do you cook efficiently when we're operating in a very small kitchen? I have to wash dishes often and takes time. Well, yes, that's the answer. It takes time. My dishwasher was broken for over 2 months here, and I was really doing a lot of recipe testing. And I have to say, Tomiko and everyone, it felt like all I was doing was washing and drying dishes. But I got into it. Instead of getting aggravated, I just made that part of my time. I concentrated on it. You know, there's a Zen saying that I really love: when you stir the rice, stir the rice. My mind tends to go all over the place. That's just the way I am. So oftentimes I'll say when I'm teaching, if I forget to finish the sentence, please let me know. But if I hone in on the task, even if it's washing dishes, that's what I do. And I dried them as I went along. Here I have a divided sink with two large bins. And what I do often is put some hot soapy water in one of them and just put the things I'm not using there if it's not something that I need right away. In a different kitchen, I had a tub where I could put that on the counter or on the floor if the kitchen is small and do it. But that's I would just suggest, Tomiko, that you just make that part of your situation and wash and dry as you go along. The drying really helps because then you don't have drain board junk, like all over the place. That drives me crazy. Scott says, in pastry school in Canada, all of your ingredients were weighed in grams. That is terrific. And US shops also weigh, but in ounces. This is something that comes up a lot. And that's why I had said earlier, our recipes in this course currently are in ounces. I've been converting everything myself to gram weight. I think it's more efficient. It's more efficient for scaling recipes up and down. It's more precise. What I do is I measure the ounces. I measure properly. I weigh it. My digital scale toggles between ounces, pounds, and grams. And I keep a chart. And that's what I suggest that you all do. It's really important. For the recipe document that I made yesterday for this particular event, I had, for example, 6 tablespoons or 4 tablespoons, 2 ounces, and then the milliliters or the grams. It's really good. Now, I have a question about tips for making gluten-free desserts more moist. Gluten-free is its own thing, and I have my palate almost always tastes baked gluten-free desserts. I don't know how to describe the taste, but I notice it. The answer is to keep trying and to find some gluten-free desserts that taste really good. I have a gluten-free version of this chocolate cake to live for that I keep referring to, that I do not, and my tasters don't taste that it's gluten-free. And the same thing with some brownies. You're going to have to experiment. There are So many gluten-free flour mixtures that you can make. It's never one flour. You don't use one gluten-free flour. The more there are mixtures, some are complete, like the Bob's have gum, have xanthan gum. I sometimes use guar gum, but you find one that works for you and just keeps trying. There's no blanket answer I can give you, except you should not taste gluten-free when you do it properly. So keep going. Allison, hi, I'm in the vegan cooking class. Is it too late to join? It is not too late to join. This course is offered about every 2 months. However, because if you're in the vegan cooking class, you know this is self-paced. And now because of the stay-at-home and the situation that we're in, we've been offering extensions. This course, this particular group just started. Would love to have you join us. So have a look and come on in and let me know, and we'll welcome you there. Suze says, you mentioned you stored your flowers in the fridge or freezer. Do you take them out of the paper container? Yes, I do. So I take them out. The first thing I do when I get a new flower is I put it in the freezer. I'm buying organic flowers. If there is a potential, especially in the summertime, it sounds icky, but it really isn't. If there was anything in there that I don't want, I put it in the freezer for 24 hours or so, and then I take it out and I have these airtight containers, and that's what I use. You can also use a bag, just want it airtight. And so this one says AP Organic, King Arthur, August 2020. This would be nice if it, oh, AP, right. And the smaller container in the back is my whole wheat pastry flour. All-purpose flour can stay out of the fridge or freezer for a longer time without a problem of becoming rancid than the whole grain flours. I hope that answers your question. I just can't imagine keeping them in the paper containers. It doesn't feel good to me. But I make sure to have the label. A lot of times I'll actually have the label on the container. Now the next question is, does your course have a lot of gluten-free recipes or recipes that can be modified? Yes, we do. This is definitely not a gluten-free course. The reason is that, again, I want people to understand, to learn foundational technique. You can't go and make really quality desserts without understanding the technique. I was trained traditionally. I've been out of that world for close to 30 years now. I'm really glad that I had that training, and that was the mindset that I brought to developing this course with the chefs at Ruby. When you're making pie dough, just because it's vegan doesn't mean you throw out the rules. For example, you measure properly. Your dough the ingredients have to be chilled. The dough has to rest a few times, the same way you would be making a conventional pie dough. So that's really important. We've had a number of students go through this course who are gluten-free, even one celiac. Most of the recipes can be converted. There are a few that cannot. But in that case, it's for a reason. I want you to learn. I want the students to learn, have a baseline. You can't convert recipes if you don't have a baseline. If you can't taste it, I bet you can find somebody who can taste it for you. But if you make something that is not gluten-free and you are gluten-free, you can still look at it. You can see how it baked. You can break a piece off and see what was supposed to happen. There are many recipes in the course that are naturally gluten-free. We have poached pear, we have baked apples, all the truffles are gluten-free. The puddings and creams and mousses are gluten-free. So there's a lot, we have a lot of gluten-free. Now, Laura says she can't use xanthan or guar gum. What substitutes? People are using psyllium husk. Can you use that, Laura? Let me know. So that's something that you can do. If you're not baking gluten-free, you really don't have to worry about the xanthan or guar. It's in the recipe for the vanilla cream, for example, but it can be left out. Now we have another question here, a very good question about humidity of where you live affect the weight of the flour. Yes, a lot of things affect the weight of the flour, which is why you want to you want to prepare your ingredients. Before I weigh my ingredients or measure my ingredients, dry ingredients I'm talking about, I whisk them first. The flour, dry ingredients settle. So the flour, for example, on the top, in the top of the container is going to weigh differently from the flour in the bottom of the container where it has settled. You whisk first, and then if you're using a measure, you put the straight-sided measuring cup in and level. You don't guess. You don't spoon the flour in. That's going to be a different weight. And then weigh it and see what happens. So I do that all the time. And we have, one of the really cool things about Ruby, I think everything's cool about this, but is that we have students all across the United States and all over the world, and we all have different environments, and it makes it really interesting. So, that is something to think about. But that's a really good question. There are a lot of things that affect weights and baking times. I'm going to be adding some more information in the course on high altitude baking. It's come up more. I know I had a document in one of the live events about that, but I happened to connect with a long ago friend who moved from Long Island, sea level, the Hamptons, to Denver, and went from being a traditional, highly regarded pastry chef to vegan. And we were talking about altitude. And what she said to me was, it depends. And she said there are these microclimates. So what worked in the morning might not even work as well or the same in the afternoon. And that's really interesting to me. It can be really frustrating because we should be working with formulas, but we're not always working with exact formulas. And you just have to learn to use all of your senses. Don't walk out of the kitchen or your workspace when you've got nuts toasting. They go from beautifully roasted to burned in a nanosecond, that kind of thing. I have this rule: if I really smell them, it's too late. And speaking of nuts, before I get to the next question, I roast and cool my nuts on half sheet pans ahead of time, and I'll put them away when they're cool. And of course, it's marked roasted and the date. Some I use raw, but the roasted ones, I think it really enhances the flavor. I wondered if putting these nuts in the freezer would affect the crispness. If when you roast nuts, you pull them out when they're finished, but they probably seem soft. They crisp up as they cool. And I can tell you definitively that once they're defrosted, they're just fine. There's absolutely no difference. So go ahead and do that. I've started very lightly roasting nut flours as well, because nut flours don't really have much of a taste. Certainly not even the blanched ones. And I think it really makes a difference. We want to build flavors. We want to use as much technique as we can to get all the flavor into the dessert. And so that's something that I can tell you that I do. Now, back to the drop biscuits. The recipe called for using blanched almond flour, which is the almonds with the skin taken off. Again, because of the grocery situation, the ingredient situation, I didn't have enough blanched almond flour. I didn't have the time to blanch my own. I often do that. It's kind of, I think it's very relaxing actually to pop the skins off one at a time and let the nuts cool, but I didn't have the time. So I mixed some Fran made whole almond meal, very finely ground almonds with the skin on, and the biscuits were fine. They were delicious. I made a half recipe. I didn't make a full recipe because I wasn't absolutely positive about that. Victoria wants to know any tips for determining the shelf life of a dessert when working on recipe development. That's a great question, Victoria. The answer is you have to see. When I make something new, now I'm going to make the assumption that it was good and I want this. I will keep some on the counter and just note it. How is it in an hour? How is it in a couple of hours? How is it the next day? I also have a piece in the refrigerator. I have a piece in the freezer. And you just keep taking notes to see what happens to it. For example, you're in my house, so you probably know you're going to see some truffles. These were in the freezer, wrapped airtight. They are not new, but two different kinds of truffles. And I am always curious about how long they're going to hold at room temperature. I tend to be a person that feels chilled more than I feel hot. Maybe that's why it's okay. This work that I do, I have cold hands, but I know, because I know my truffles, I still keep them out at room temperature to see when is too far. And these just hold beautifully. I keep them in the freezer. I serve them at room temperature. Cheryl wants to know, she's got a two-parter. How do you organize your recipes in a binder or all on the computer? Do you have advice for someone who, well, let me get to the first one first. I yearn to have a paperless office. I need printed recipes. I just spent 2 whole days, in fact, printing, and I have a 3-hole puncher and filing recipes. That works best for me. I have friends who never print their recipes. One of my former Ruby students, she's Plant Pro and Essential Vegan Desserts. She's very much better at the computer than I am, that's for sure. She doesn't use any printed. She said she has everything on her phone and iPad. It takes me too long to find. Although lately I have found, what's her name? Suri? No, yeah, Suri. And I'll say to my iPad, find francostigan.com and such a recipe, and it comes up. But I like to make notes on my recipes and in my books. So that's what I do, but it's completely personal. It's up to you. Certainly the recipes that are my favorite recipes are definitely printed out, and I have printed out every recipe from the Ruby course, which is a lot, but I like to put my hands on something. That's just personal. The second part of your question, do you have advice for someone who's more of an intuitive cook who finds it hard to make a recipe book but wants to? So I'm not sure what you're asking me, Cheryl. Are you saying you want to write a book? You can, let me know, just add to your question. By nature, I'm more of an intuitive cook, or just someone who likes to not necessarily pay the close attention that I'm asking everybody to pay. But you need to pay attention when you're doing desserts. If you're making chocolate pudding and you use 3 ounces of chocolate instead of 2.5 ounces, it's not going to matter. But if you decide I don't feel like using the amount of cocoa powder it says, or the kind of cocoa powder it says, or the kind of starch it says, you're going to have a disaster. So you can't really be super intuitive. I channel that kind of joyfulness into plating and serving ideas. So again, with these, wherever I have things all over the kitchen. So with the pumpkin butter and the pumpkin mousse and the cream, and this is cream as well, but I colored it with blue pea powder, and burnt orange actually gave me that color. Then I can do a number of things. I can, I made a parfait with cream, with mousse, and with cranberry coulis, and with candied pecans. And it was great. And I did them in all different kinds of glasses. So that's where I use my intuitiveness, for example. But you need to write everything down. You can feel that way, but you still have to write it down, because let's say you made something that you absolutely love and you have to backtrack and figure it out. And I say that because I've been there and I get really angry with myself. So part of your mise en place and joy is have a notebook and write things down. I have terrible handwriting at this point. I think it's because I use the computer so much. And so when I do write a recipe down, I go, what did I say? So I'm much more careful now. And I suggest you do the same. Something else that I always have is this container is organic cane sugar that's just lightly roughed up, lightly ground. And this is the same organic sugar that's been powdered. This is not the same thing as confectioner sugar. It's hard for us to make our own. But when I do really powder it, then I'll add a little bit of starch. And I have some confectioner sugar. And the same thing with whole cane sugar. This has been ground. And this is coconut sugar that's been ground. So that's the way it goes. I am thinking about my meal for the holiday, my solo meal. I'm pretty inspired by the recipes that were made yesterday at this Les Dames event. I'm definitely thinking about the dessert I'm going to have. I might make myself a little tartlet, but in order to do it, I start my mise en place, which starts with thinking. What do I have? What do I feel like making? What has to be prepped ahead? And I make sure my knives are sharp. I make sure that if I'm using a machine, that it works. I make sure that I have room in my fridge or freezer. I've got all my containers. I've got my tape and pen. And I make a list too. And that's, sometimes I'll draw things. I like to draw things in a notebook, how I think I would like something to look. But one of the nice things about keeping ingredients in clear jars, if you can, is that I'm often inspired by the ingredients and I want to see what I can do. So I want to see, there's another mise en place question here. Out of curiosity, when you mise en place for a recipe, do you prefer to place each prepped ingredient in its own bowl or combine? That's a really good question. If you're in the course, I want to see, per the criteria, the ingredients weighed out, like this one that says cream. And I know that this is 3 tablespoons because I was making a half recipe. Like this, not combined. If you combine things and the last thing that you put in is you hit your elbow or somebody hit your elbow, you can really have a problem. So we don't do that. Do I ever? Sometimes with the drop biscuits, the liquid ingredients go into a measuring cup These are my absolute favorite next to the little ones because I can squeeze and pour. So for that yesterday, and because my demo again was so short, I had the coconut milk, I had the orange zest, and I had the lemon and almond extracts all in here together, ready to go and show people. But I generally don't do that. If I'm cooking and I'm not in the Plant Pro or one of the other Ruby courses, it's a different story. Then I'll just see. But for desserts, it's not the best idea to combine things. You know, if you're sifting, then you've got a sifter, or I really use a strainer set over a bowl, and in goes one kind of flour, in goes another kind of flour, in goes the baking powder, baking soda, and salt. I learned this when I was working in a pastry kitchen, and I would put the flours in the bowl and whisk them up, and then put, without mixing, the baking powder, the baking soda, the salt, maybe some spice. And I could visually, here's the recipe, and I could visually see that they were all there. But before I start mixing a batter, I make sure that, again, the oven is at temperature, the rack is in the right place, the oven is at temperature, the pans are prepared, they're oiled, there's parchment if needed, and I have all the ingredients, and I scan the recipe. Again, even though it might be a recipe that I've made thousands of times, that's what I do. And that's what I would suggest that you all do. So does anybody have any last questions? Because we're just about out of time, but I want to take this. That's it. No more questions for today. I really want to take the time to wish each and every one of you a joyful holiday season, no matter what. I was feeling, I'm being perfectly honest with you, I was feeling a little sad this week because I had expected to go and be with my kids in Bucks County, which is pretty nearby. And they have a new puppy too, but I can't. It's not something that we can do now. My city is closing down again. And so I'm going, I just reframed it. We're going to Zoom. I'm going to Zoom with the kids in LA, my other grandchildren, and I'm going to talk with friends, and I'm going to actually set my table with a cloth and some squashes and whatever I have in the house, and feel really grateful, which I do, for everything that I have. I hope that you all have beautiful, joyous holidays, and that you stay safe. And I hope to see you again in December when we do another live event. If anyone has any further questions for me, Fran@ruby.com. If you have questions about the course, you can write to support@ruby.com, or me, Fran@ruby.com. And thank you for being here. I hope to see you again.